don't know what it is, but there is just something about this Legion that makes me thirsty and brings me back to my college days. Ha, that's it. Come on, you have to admit the resemblance here is very uncanny. On a serious note, or to the topic of the video, Legio Defensor is probably one of the more straightforward Titan Legions, and very true to its lore. This is a Legio that favors high strength, long range, powerful guns, typically aimed towards the Warlord chassis. But before we get into the list, let's take a look at this Legio's rules. Our first Legio trait is called Righteous Fire, and this is really the foundation of any Defensor list. Frankly, it is just outright very powerful. How this one works is, in the first game round, during the combat phase, your Titan can fire one of its weapons twice. After you're done firing the weapon, you have to advance your reactor 2 positions in addition to any pushes you would need to fire that weapon. This is why Defensor really tends to skew and favor things like a Warlord Titan. The Warlord Titan has a really large plasma reactor capacity, so it can afford to get hot early in the game to push for that extra weapon firing and have a decent chance of repairing that damage. Obviously, the go-to for something like this would be the Volcano Cannon, and I totally agree, but I wouldn't shy away from using something like a Quake Cannon either, because it could still be powerful and you'd have the ability to mess with your opponent's movement. Our next Defensor Legio trait is called Indomitable Resolve. This lets you add 1 to your Titan's command checks after you've had one of your Maniple Titans destroyed. It's not really anything too crazy on the tabletop, especially when you consider you're going to have a preference towards building with Warlords, but it will make your command checks better on things like your Warhounds, Warbringers, and Reavers. On a side note, this one's really true to the fluff and just kind of shows Defensor really holding their ground and being stubborn despite losses. The first of 2 stratagems available to Defensor is called Day of Retribution. This is for 2 stratagem points, and it occurs in the strategy phase of the first game round. What it lets you do is double the range of one of your chosen Titan's weapons, and you fire immediately in the strategy phase. After you're done firing that weapon at its doubled range, you advance your Titan's reactor 3 positions. We're really starting to see a lot of this Legion's rules occur in the first round or before the first round. And once again, 3 places on a plasma track, that's a lot. You're going to want to use a Titan with a pretty good reactor capacity for a stratagem like this. And to take advantage of the doubling of range, you're going to probably want to look at something that has high shots and short range. Likely, or certainly, you're going to be firing shots off at a shielded target, because this occurs before the combat phase or movement phase. So I wouldn't waste it on your missile launchers. They've already got a long enough range to hit anything, and you don't want to max your reactor 3 positions for missiles. Where it could be fun though is I'm thinking something like a Sun Fury Annihilator on a Warlord, or a Gatling Blaster, macro Gatling Blasters on the Warlord, Reaver, and Warbringer. Off the top of my head, I would say this is most ideal for a high shot, low range, shield stripping gun. At least that's how I would use it, to kind of get the most out of this one. Our next Defensor stratagem is called Blessing of the Emperor. This one's 2 stratagem points, and frankly, this is an auto-include. If you're playing Defensor, I would definitely look at popping this stratagem in your deck every game you play. What it lets you do is ignore a hit that would force one of your Titans from rolling on the catastrophic damage table. Let that sink in for a second. You have a Titan that is about to blow up and supernova. For 2 stratagem points, you get to completely ignore that hit. This is beneficial regardless of how you build your list, and it's beneficial to every match play mission. If you have Hold the Line and one of your Titans is about to blow up, play this card, that Titan holds its ground. If you're doing Vital Cargo, your Titan's about to make it off the board edge and your opponent's pretty much destroyed it, play this card and you've got a chance of getting closer. For Retrieval, if you're about to get downed and explode, once again, play this card and at the very least get that objective closer to your side of the board. It is hugely beneficial regardless of mission. I'd say for 2 stratagem points, take it every time. You're going to find a use for this one. Legio Defensor has one unique piece of war gear, and this one's so 40k it's hilarious. They're called Devotional War Sirens. Essentially in the lore, Defensor would go to war and blast their religious beliefs, sermons, and hymns through these war sirens and vox relays. And just stride to war essentially listening to their Bible in audiobook format. A little surprised the Sisters of Battle aren't joined to the hip of this legion. I figured they'd love it. For 20 points, this lets every Defensor Titan within 8 inches of a Titan equipped with the War Siren to roll 2 dice when making its command check, and all those Titans get to pick the higher result. Once again, this is really boosting your ability to get your orders off, and this is pretty situational for me depending on how you build your list. If you've gone Warlord heavy, you're not gonna need something like this. But if you've gone down the Reaver and Warbringer route, this might be handy just to give you some dependability and reliability for getting your orders off. Taking a look at princeps traits, this is kind of a mixed bag. You have typically a good pro with a pretty restrictive con for most of the traits. The first one is called Enduring Hatred. This lets your Princeps and Eurus reroll hit rolls of 1 once their Titan has suffered critical damage on any location. This is awesome for Defensor. They're a very aggressive legion with the Righteous Fire, and rerolling those 1s is only going to make your shots count even more. The downside of this one though is every time you have a disabled weapon, you have to allocate a die to repair that weapon before you can repair anything else. This kind of sounds like a no-brainer at first, but think about it. A lot of the Defensor stratagems and traits actually force you to increase your plasma reactor. So your Titans are going to be running hot, especially turn 1 and turn 2. Having to allocate a die to repair a weapon may seriously hamper your game plan, especially when it comes to managing your Titan's reactor. Our next Defensor trait is Crusade Veteran. I'm typically not a fan of these, but this one could be worth it in a pinch. It is a once per game princeps trait. It lets your princeps issue themselves another order after you've successfully got off an emergency repair. This second order could be another emergency repair, so you're getting some great benefits to really repair a lot of damage or repair some damage and do a full stride or a first fire. The downside of this though is you're actually stuck with the restrictions of both orders you give that Titan. Really good benefits with really limiting gameplay. Considering this is a once per game, I feel like there's a lot better traits out there between Defensor and the rulebook traits to look at before you really consider looking at something like a once per game princeps trait. It's too limiting, too situational, and you can get a lot more out of other things. But to each their own, and I could definitely see this trait getting you out of a pinch if you really need it. Our last Nova Guard trait is called Icon of the True. While your Princeps Titan is on the board, all Knight banners add 1 to their command checks, and also all other friendly Legio Titans. This is everything. Where this one gets interesting and worth looking at is if you're mixing and matching your Legios. Say you have a Defensor Maniple and, I don't know, a Dauntless Maniple. Well, your Defensor Princeps is going to make your command checks better for your Dauntless Maniple, meaning your Dauntless Princeps can now take a trait that'll help them offensively instead of maybe looking at increasing their command checks. This could give you some flexibility in that secondary Maniple and Legio. When it comes to the +1 for Knights, this is where things get pretty interesting for Defensor. This is going to prevent your Knights from becoming shaken and keep them effective. And if you go down the route of building your Maniple this way, I did look at it myself and it's certainly a contender, but the Dominus Battle Force Maniple could really benefit from something like Icon of the True. This is going to keep your Sacrificial Lamb Knight banners reliable and unshaken, allowing them to take those hits and be the bodyguards for the Titans in a Dominus Maniple. I should mention though, fitting a Dominus Maniple into a confrontation match play game, you're gonna have to make a lot of compromises. But if you're playing at the epic clash level, doing a Dominus force with Defensor and Icon of the True could be worth a look. You'll definitely have the points to max out those Questoris Knight banners to take that hit. For my take on the list itself, this is going to be nothing really overly groundbreaking for Defensor. I think most of the online communities caught on to this one, but I am going to base this off of an Extergimus Battle Line Maniple. This Maniple comes with a mandatory component of 3 Warlords with an optional component of 1 Warlord and 1 Warbringer Titan. The benefit of this Maniple, which is really going to play off of that Alpha Strike potential of the Nova Guard, is called Scorched Earth. This lets you add 2 to the strength of one of your non-melee weapons in the combat phase, and when you activate a weapon in this way, you have to advance your Titan's reactor by 1 position or 2 positions if that weapon has a dice value of 5 or greater. So this is really going to let you take advantage of things like Quake Cannons, Plasma Guns, and Volcano Cannons. and that's the main reason why I've decided to base the list off of this. I think it's going to make a good use off of that Righteous Fire Legio trait. Let's throw some numbers at this maniple. Right off the bat, it was really hard to fit an effective Defensor maniple into a confrontation 1750 game match. I had to make a lot of concessions here. I really wanted to spam the Volcano Cannon and Quake Cannon combo into here, but the points just wouldn't allow it to let me make use of all the tricks this Legio can do. That being said, I had to spam the Quake Cannons, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I would have really liked that increased strength of the Volcano Cannon. Leading this maniple off, though, my Princeps and Yoris is going to be a Warlord. It's going to have a Quake Cannon, Volcano Cannon, and the missile launchers. This was the only Warlord I was able to put a Volcano Cannon on, but at least I squeezed one in. For the most part, the Princeps trait, this is going to depend on your play style. Personally, I'm leaning towards Enduring Hatred. This is going to let my Princeps reroll 1s for their hit rolls after they've sustained critical damage and force them to allocate a die to repairing disabled weapons. This will help your Princeps kind of be more effective in the late game if you need it. And, I mean, Defensor, if you didn't destroy your opponent turn 1 and 2, something like this will be very handy late game. The other alternative, if you're kind of more passive, would be Devoted Servant of the Machine. This one lets you add 1 to your die rolls for your repair phase. And it only applies to a single die. So, being a Defensor player, your Titans are going to be running really hot, especially in the early game. Being able to augment your repair phase is going to be beneficial throughout the whole game. So these were the two standouts for me. Again, I'm leaning towards Enduring Hatred because this Legion just seems to be an all or nothing, but if you want that durability, maybe the Servant of the Machine is for you. Capping out the rest of the mandatory components for the Exturgimus, I have 2 Warlords, identical loadouts. It's all I could fit. They both have dual Quake Cannons and missile launchers. I'd say, sure, maybe look at swapping out one of those Quake Cannons if you can find the points, but this is as cheap as I could get it and cover the maniple bases for the Titan classes. In terms of optional components, though, I did decide to go for the Warbringer Titan, and this one's kitted out with a Gatling Blaster, a Melta Cannon, and a Quake Cannon. Again, this guy's, I would imagine, pretty cheap for a Warbringer, and the Gatling Blaster you might be scratching your head on, but I have something in mind for that really plays off of the Defensor loadouts. This list as a whole caps out at 1750 on the dot. Like I said, I had to make a ton of compromises to fit in everything I wanted to. This is as cheap as I could get it and as maxed as I could get it for a confrontation. If, however, you were looking at playing Defensor on a epic clash scale, ideally, I would like to add tracking gyroscopes to everything to make use of those missile launchers. Where applicable, I would swap the second Quake Cannon to a Volcano Cannon, making these pretty much backline support Warlords. When it comes to the Warbringer, I'd swap that Quake Cannon to a Volcano Cannon, and the Melta maybe to a Laser Blaster, or I would go something like a Laser Blaster Melta Cannon combo. The Warbringer in particular, I'd love to throw the gyroscopes on, as well as the plasmatic binders. That thing's going to need a lot of help with heat, just with how hot Defensor is going to be rolling turn 1 and turn 2. And Given an epic clash, it might be worthwhile to actually put the plasmatic binders on all of your titans just to round this out. That'll give you some points to play with if you wanted to add some knights or throw in another warlord. I said, the list 2 here is really just me maxing this out with all the bells and whistles I wish I could afford for a confrontation. Let's talk stratagems. Right off the bat, if you're playing a confrontation, you've probably got 5 strategy points available, so you can fit both of these, and they are both from the Defensor page. Why I decided to go with these is they're actually really complementary to Defensor's playstyle, and pretty easy to integrate into any list or mana pool you decide to go with. The first one's Blessing of the Emperor. This one's just really going to help your list past turn 2. If your opponent's still on the board with enough to give you a hard time, this is going to allow one of your titans to survive catastrophic damage as if it never happened, and allow you to potentially score your objectives, deny your opponent scoring their mission objectives, or at the very least force your opponent to throw more shots into the same titan. The next one, Day of Retribution, allowing you to double the range of a weapon, is really going to help you get some utility early game, actually before the game even starts, out of your Warbringer Titan. Granted, you're going to max your Warbringer's reactor, but it's really going to help you strip some voids early game. Let's take a look at how this actually plays out on the table. I'm only going to show one Warlord for the purposes of this, and the one Warbringer, mainly because all the Warlords in this mana pool are more or less going to act the exact same. Looking at turn 1 in the strategy phase, this is where you're going to pop off that Day of Retribution stratagem, and you're actually going to use it on the Warbringer's Gatling Blaster to drop some shields pretty much before turn 1 even starts. You're then going to follow up and give the whole mana pool first fire orders. In the movement phase, you're going to use those first fire orders to launch off the missile launchers on all of your warlords at shielded targets, and the Gatling Blaster if it has range to drop additional shields. At this point, your opponent's pretty much whole mana pool should be unshielded. Moving on to the combat phase, you're going to take advantage of the mana pool trait, Scorched Earth. This is going to let you add 2 to the strength of one of your guns. Whether you want to start with Scorched Earth for your first shot and get armor modifiers, or try and get armor modifiers and follow up with Scorched Earth, that's up to you. It works pretty well either way, but this is where you need to trigger that Scorched Earth just to play off of the first fire order. If your reactors can take it, your Titans and Defensor are going to be really hot, especially the Warbringer. If your reactor can take it, you're going to take advantage of Righteous Fire, as it only applies turn 1, and fire one of each Titan's weapons an additional time. This is going to give you some really good damage at your opponent. If your opponent's still standing after turn 1, then good on them. They've got some pretty durable Legion rules, but I have a feeling this is just going to shred most of your opponent's game plan and their ability to even do anything for the mission. In turn 2, you're more or less going to be giving all of your Titans first fire or split fire orders, depending on which targets they have available, what they can hit, and how much damage that target really needs to make it blow up. It's at turn 2 that you're once again going to take advantage of Scorched Earth where you can, and if your reactors can take it. But you're also going to start to shift your focus to whatever mission you've drawn. This list has some serious drawbacks after turn 1, and you're really going to need to start looking at accomplishing your mission, especially if it's mobility based like Vital Cargo and Retrieval. Turn 3, there should really be nothing left of your opponent. Whatever there is left at this point you could almost ignore, but you're really going to have to focus on getting your heat down to push where you need to, and really focus on the mission, because your mobility is going to be your worst enemy when it comes to this list. And keep in mind, you have that princeps trait that even if your princeps take some abuse, it's only going to make them fire more accurately. And you've always got that blessing of the Emperor to just totally ignore one of your Titans blowing up, if your opponent even had enough to make one of your Titans roll on the catastrophic damage table. I had previously mentioned this list has some major weaknesses. The whole idea of it is just absolutely annihilate your opponent on turn 1, since most of Defensor's tricks do take place in turn 1, but the cost of it is your Titan's reactors are all going to be running extremely hot. You're pretty much as much of a danger to yourself as whatever your opponent has left. So reactor capacity is going to be a huge drawback, and you're really going to have to pay attention to allocating those dice to cooling your plasma reactors. The next big drawback, in particular with a Extergimus Maniple, is mobility. You're going to have a really hard time getting across the board, midfield, or to your opponent's side of the board. Between these two things, you might not actually have enough turns left to accomplish something like Retrieval or Vital Cargo, especially if your Warbringer is running too hot for you to push to get that extra movement, or it's somehow gotten destroyed and you weren't able to use Blessings of the Emperor. Well, that was our look at Defensor on the tabletop. This is a total Alpha Strike Legion that just thrives in the first turn or two of the game. It's a total beat stick. I wouldn't recommend bringing a list like this to a friendly game, as somebody's probably going to have a case of the feel badsies when they get wiped out early. I typically prefer lists and legions with a little more nuance and a few more tricks than just to beat someone's face in turn 1. But I do think this list and this Legio might actually give my own personal list a pretty good run for its money. If I had enough Warlords, I'd love to play it out, and maybe one of these days I will. If you play Defensor yourself and you're using them in a different way, feel free, fire it in the comments down below, and any of your general thoughts about the Legio. I'll see everyone on the next one for whichever Legion we end up taking a look at next. Take it easy.